As a Roman Catholic priest, Henri Nouwen inherited a classical tradition of spiritual formation. He was formed, he was shaped in a system where you found your way back to God in certain steps and stages, like climbing Jacob's ladder. Rung by rung, the ladder ascended, and you climbed the ladder. Angels were there to help you, but still it took effort, it took discipline, it took work. Henri Nouwen was one who read John Climacus's book on the ladder of divine ascent. He followed Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. He'd read them devotionally, and he, like they, spoke of the journey to God in stages, that we journey back to our source. There's first an awakening of desire to know God, to love God. And in our awakening, in that awakening to the Spirit within us, we go through a season of purgation, purging of the passions. Stage 3, the mystics say, is a stage of illumination. We're enlightened. We come to Christ. We feel at one with Him. We feel that we are loved and held tightly in His embrace. And if you stay in stage 3, it's not really the full journey back to God. We also go through what Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross describe as a dark night of the soul. It's what we might refer to as a wilderness experience, a dry period in your life. It doesn't mean God is absent. It doesn't mean God is not close by. It doesn't mean that we're no longer a Christian or a spiritual person. It means that we are wandering in the desert for a bit. We are experiencing a dark night of the soul and the senses that prevent us from feeling that God is near. But if we persevere through that, we come to a place of union with God, of communion with Christ, a stage of unification with the divine, sometimes called the beatific vision. Well, these 5 stages of Jacob's ladder, of progression in the spiritual life, is part of spiritual formation. You can read about the ladder of ascent in John Climacus's Ladder of Divine Ascent, or read Dionysius, the Celestial Hierarchy. Read one of my favorite texts is Gregory of Nyssa's Life of Moses, and From Glory to Glory. Whether it's Gregory or Dionysius or Climacus or Jacob's Ladder in the Bible, these are about stage theories. But it's not the part that Henri Nouwen focuses upon. His focus is not on the ladder of divine ascent. It's putting that Jacob's ladder on its side and speaking about the horizontal movements of the spiritual life. Henri came to the insight that spiritual formation was not so much about steps and stages, but about states of consciousness, states of grace. Henri's interest was pastoral psychology. He was a psychologist priest, a priest-psychologist. He was very interested in the study of the psyche, the study of the soul. As a priest, he was interested in theology, study of God, theos. So when you have study of theos and study of psyche, they come together in this place called spirituality. Henri sees the spiritual life as a journey. The biblical motif of journey comes out of the book of Exodus, where the children of Israel left Egypt, where they were in bondage, went out into the desert of transformation, the wilderness, received the law, had a praise festival to Yahweh, the Lord, saw in the distance the land of milk and honey, but wandered around for 40 years or so, finally gaining access to the promised land. On this journey inward, Henri Nouwen offers us some amazing insights. he speaks of the mysterium tremendum, fancy word for the overwhelming power of the inner life, the mystery of the inner life that expresses itself, that presents itself in such overwhelming force. It presents itself with challenges, with complexities, yes, even compulsions and contradictions. We find within ourselves dynamics that are common to humanity. Spiritual formation occurs as we gain awareness of our inner polarities and oppositions and follow the movements prompted by the Spirit. Sometimes it helps to understand spiritual formation in terms of both stages and states, states of consciousness and stages of development. See, your state is your inner aliveness. It's your spiritual consciousness. Your stage, on the other hand, is your outer awareness, your progressive wholeness. The goal is to be both holy and whole, saintly and wise. But your state and your stage don't always coincide. Sometimes your state is one of full salvation. Your state is one of grace, of peace, of unity with God. But your stage, you're not so far along in the journey. You may be intellectually handicapped. You may be emotionally limited. You may be immature. But your state is one with God. Stages and states don't always coincide. Inner states are about God's grace at work in your heart by faith. Outer stages are about going on to perfection in your love for God, self, neighbor, and other. It's about psychological and spiritual maturity. So we both mature in our faith, but we also choose daily what state of consciousness we will be in. Stages of growth. When we talk about stages of growth, we're asking the questions of progress. How far have I advanced as a Christian? Have I matured in faith? On what level am I now? When will I reach union with God? John Wesley had his set of questions about stages of growth in the Christian life. Mostly it was this question: are you going on to perfection? Yes, you've been saved. Yes, you've been sanctified. Yes, you're a Christian. You've been converted. You're justified. But are you going on to perfection, to completeness, to health and wholeness? These are questions of stages. Again, Henri Nouwen was focused not on stages, but on the states of grace in your inner life, your states of consciousness. How is it with your soul? John Wesley asks his Methodist followers. Have you overcome your sense of separateness and superiority? Richard Rohr asks his followers. Are you living in a house of fear, or have you moved into the house of love? In traditional religious language, it's how is your relationship with God? What is in your heart today? See, we're always in flux. We're always leaving and returning. We're always in a state of comfort and grace, or we're disturbed in our spirit. We're either downcast in our soul, or we are praising God in joy. And these are states of consciousness that we can change. We can be transformed in. We can move from one state to another. We can move from resentment to gratitude, from fear to love, from sorrow to joy. Because the spiritual life is about states more than stages. However, we do journey to God in stages. Modern stage theories. Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Piaget was one of the first educational psychologists to speak about how children develop cognitively over time and space. Piaget's theories of cognitive development inform Erik Erikson's ages of man. Erik Erikson identified 8 stages of human growth and development. And We follow these stages almost predictably in our psychological development. Lawrence Kohlberg took Piaget and Erikson stages and added a layer of moral development. James Fowler wrote Stages of Faith in 1981. Carol Gilligan and Sharon Parks corrected Fowler. Spiritual formation, says Henri Nouwen, is not about steps or stages on the way to perfection. It's about movements from the mind to the heart. Rather than sequential, predictable, and progressive stages of psychosocial, psychospiritual development, the spiritual life is more like a series of movements, of cyclical movements from one polarity to another. So this is about states more than stages. You see, spiritual formation presents us with opportunities to enter into the center of our own heart, become familiar with the complexities of our own nature, that we are like all others, that nothing human is alien to me. The goal of the spiritual life is to be made whole, body, soul, and spirit. Paul Tournier, a psychologist from Switzerland, is quoted as saying, "Unless you are known and loved by at least one other person, you cannot develop as a whole person." It's more about wholeness than it is about perfection. It's more about being a conduit of God's grace to others and to ourselves than being a perfect instrument of God's peace. Wholeness is what spiritual formation is all about. Jeremiah said to seek the shalom of the community. Jesus said, "I've come that you might have life in all its fullness." St. Paul prayed that we would become spiritually mature and to go on to perfection and to complete the journey. Holiness is wholeness in body, soul, and spirit. That's what the spiritual life is about. This is our spiritual formation.